Annie Ohana, welcome, welcome. Social activist, many hats that you wear, and a great contributor to the well-being and the social causes for all communities in the Lower Mainland and throughout the province. So thank you again, Annie. And please do, just to share with the audience of how we connected. I saw you in a very dynamic way organizing this large event a few years back, which was a counter protest to white nationalists. I believe it was Soldiers of Odin,
Yeah.
and they were espousing anti-immigrant, anti, visible minorities, and anti-Muslim, Jewish, all that negativity. And so, interestingly enough, I was on my way to the gathering,
Mm.
and I thought I'm going to pop into the Starbucks and grab a coffee, and all of the white supremacists were there. They were basically,
Right.
because of the work that you did, the crowd that came to this
Yeah.
city hall
Yeah.
were thousands. So it
Mm.
basically dwarfed their kind of thing. There's like maybe
Yeah.
10 of them, 5 of them. They
Yeah.
were kind of, I guess, crying in their coffee. And I got to say, what you pulled off was amazing. So please, let's maybe, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and maybe even
Mhm.
talk about how that event happened, just to
Yeah.
give the audience an idea of how it all came together.
Absolutely. Yeah. So first and foremost, I'm an educator, and I think that's where I'll leave it at that. Right. I'm lucky to work in the public school system in Surrey, BC, Matheson Secondary, go Mustangs, and through my work, so I'm an anti-oppression educator. I have a master's in equity studies, and I have a background in criminology and political science, and I've done various things throughout the years. One of the big things I do believe is in empowerment and mentorship through identity, and using the youth voice to teach them more about justice and transformative justice, and ways of serving towards justice, instead of just thinking of charity or kind of more like white savior dynamics, kind of going well above and beyond that. And that is the goal in what I teach, in how I teach, and even in my background, being a Sephardic, a Jewish woman who's white passing, who's a first generation settler on the unceded territories today of the Kwantlen, Katzie, and Semiahmoo peoples. So in terms of the rally, in 2017, it really came about within a week, believe it or not. That was how quick it occurred. What happened was that, so I'm a teacher, so I belong to the BC Teachers Federation, which is our union here in BC. And our summer conference where we get training as leaders was canceled due to the fires that were, just raging across BC. And the air quality was so bad in Kamloops that they were forced to cancel the entire retreat. And so at the same time, we were getting word about this counter rally, this rally that was supposed to happen at City Hall. And this was on the tail of Charlottesville in the States, where a young woman had lost her life, and where Donald Trump, who was president at the time, had commented on the fact that all of these white supremacist elements that had gathered in that town were, quote, good people. So, now we know how bad it got, but that was, really when, the heat was starting to rise on a lot of the very overt, physically violent white supremacy. Like, I want to make clear, like, we know we're in a white supremacist system. It's a settler colonial state. All of this, we understand. But this idea that this president wouldn't even use the term racism, would not even identify the groups across North America that were clearly active in promoting hatred and carrying out acts of terror throughout North America. This was a new level for those of us, of the last several generations who maybe had not been part of the civil rights movement or the Jim Crow era. This was new to us. So what happened was about 10 or so folks, a lot of us teachers, and then some other community members, the Peace Bearers, et cetera, we all got together, and it really did grow very quickly. We put together an intersectional list of speakers from all types of communities. And yes, and then on that, and then we got a lot of support very quickly from the mayor, who was open to us protesting at City Hall, and even the prime minister. And that was very much a catalyst in terms of how many people learned about, the protest. And yes, we did dwarf them. It was interesting that I did get word of, yeah, they're at the Starbucks, they're on the ferry, but they were very small in number. Um, there was a lot of fear. We could have had even more. And it was just the fear of, wow, this happened so quickly. Am I really safe if I go, if I wear a hijab, if I wear a kippah, whatever, if I show, who I am, and so we did our very best. And thankfully, everything went quite well. Policing in terms of VPD, there were some issues, but overall, certainly we were allowed to carry forward with our entire event. It's interesting to note that that was the first time, as a teacher, that I got a death threat. So
Wow.
when we were at a Waves, like on Main and Hastings, and sorry, Cambie and Hastings, I think that would be. Anyways, something like that. And we were about to head up to City Hall, and on Facebook comes this message of, something like, I hope you get shot at your own rally. And it was
Wow.
fascinating. So all of a sudden, it was interesting to see a cocoon develop in terms of, okay, those of us that are kind of at the front of this need to be very careful. So it was fascinating to see, but it was amazing. And honestly, since then, just that one rally, the amount of connections that were made has been amazing. And the solidarity has not ended from that day.
And I saw your leadership on full display there, putting it all together, and it was thousands. It was like the city hall was just, it was a peaceful protest. There were thousands of people that were there, and again, as somebody that's born and raised in BC myself, and lives in Vancouver, loves the city of Vancouver, just made me again proud of our kind of multiculturalism and this type of outpouring that in Vancouver, our folks here say, no, not on our watch. This is not who we are.
Exactly. And just to be clear, I was one of many organizers, right? And I think everybody contributed something amazing, and that's what made it incredible. I certainly was not afraid to talk to the elements that clearly were not very friendly. I was even told to stop doing that because I was just kind of, taking away energy, right? And just kind of giving it to people that would not agree with us no matter what. But you're right. And I think that is very key to the understanding of the diversity that we have here. To me, diversity means you can have a lot of different opinions, different faith practices, all kinds of things. But when it comes down to human rights, that is something we stand up and clearly make sure that that is at the forefront. And no matter how many of them there were, in terms of them physically showing up, we were not going to let them take away that sense of, that safe space, that public space. We know the reality. We know the amounts of hate crime and hate speech and microaggressions and just how much of it is underreported. The majority of it is not reported to police. So, yeah, it was small in number, but we know they know that they think they have power. And so what else can we do but really take a stand when such individuals come forward? At the end of the day, we didn't shut anybody down. It was that there were many of us who wanted to speak. And just by being there, maybe you didn't get the mic, but just by being there, that was your chance to be a resident, a citizen, however the status of what you are in this country, that you have the right to that space just as much as anybody else. But the fact that our human rights codes, our criminal code, everything is very clear about the type of language and the vitriol that they spew, and that is in fact illegal and is considered a hate crime under our very own charter.
Absolutely, and really, I think you did actually invite our community represented by Haroon, and
Yeah.
Haroon did speak. He spoke very well, and I thought he really delivered a great message. And then also the Black Lives Matter representative, I really enjoyed his talk, and yeah, all the speakers and how it came together, and really it was a beautiful day. And
Mhm.
so the way everyone came together in that way, I really appreciated everybody that helped put that together. And so thank you, Annie, for being part of that team and being a leader.
Yeah, and like I said, it's beautiful to see the solidarity since then. We've seen incredible, the sustainability, right? 150,000, Black Lives Matter over many years now, but you know, especially over last summer, and so many more. You know, Women's March, which I've been involved with, like just it's endless. It's almost sad when you consider how much marching we need to do. But at the same time, it is a beautiful sight to see because I think we're so disjointed at times, and violence, and especially in terms of discrimination and white supremacy and those kinds of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, can be very isolating, can be very ostracizing. So I think just watching those things happen, whether you can participate or not, is hopefully a sign that we are there. We can make a stand and hopefully speak to the powers that be, because they are, you know, they are the ones that should be making the changes at that systemic level.
Absolutely. And Annie, just on a personal level, because obviously we come with our history and our upbringing and our motivations. What brought you to this passion for the work that you do in social justice and inclusivity and multiculturalism? What brought you this passion? What inspired you to do what you do?
Yeah, it's there's so much. You know, first of all, being of Jewish faith, I grew up in a very progressive household, and but also the reality that so my family's Moroccan by origin, but I have many relatives who live in Israel proper, and I want to make this very clear. I fully support Palestinian rights and Palestinian sovereignty and all of that. Um, but you know, having been unfortunately seeing violence around our world that was predicated on, you know, occupation and you know, really horrific anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and continual white supremacy, I was allowed to learn that at a very early age. Being in a family of color, most of my relatives are quite dark skinned, and seeing what they had to go through. I went to high school in the United States in Southern Florida. I was born in Montreal. Um, all of those things kind of built up at a very young age. And then very early on, wanting to know the truth, being more of a questioner. And then as I entered university, I was very much mindful of perhaps heading into law. And so going through learning about the legal system and seeing the problems within that legal system. And I remember something very key. I was in high school in South Florida, and I was introduced to Howard Zinn. I was very lucky. I had some very progressive teachers. I was in a military program as well, believe it or not, the JROTC, which is like the Defense Department's military program, as it were. And learning about Rwanda. And as a Jew thinking, wait a minute, you're telling me that in 1994, as I was just leaving middle school, that no one told me this, that I don't remember it being a major news story. And then finding out once I returned to Canada, the role that Canada had to play through General Romeo Dallaire, and realizing that there is so much hidden truth. There are so many stories that are never told, that are never highlighted, and that there is a system behind that. That it's not just one bad apple here or there. So taking criminology, political science, and then as I entered teaching, very much focusing on anti-oppression and social justice and transformative notions of justice is what brought me to the work. I am very lucky to hold many privileges, but also having had many, you know, not privileges, but also having some power that came with being an educator, and really being mindful that what can I do to push forward justice? Maybe it's a very small way, but it's going to be something. And I've always, that's always been what has driven me. And yes, and I think that the more we act in solidarity, the more intersectional we are, especially as a Jew, really connecting the dots between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, you know, the two sides of the same coin. Indigenous rights being absolutely massive in terms of being on unceded territory, and the genocide that took place on these lands. All these things are actually part and parcel of the same problem. So that's my passion. And I love seeing students rise up to that and adults rise up to that, and showing them that they need not feel that they are powerless, or when they're told, well, you know, it's too big of a problem, or let the politicians deal with it. I don't believe that. I've never believed that. I will never believe that. I think it's up to us to truly step forward and hold our leadership accountable when our lives, are the ones that are at risk.
Agreed. And there's a quote: "Those that aren't interested in politics deserve who they're ruled by." And and
Yeah.
and and for the work that you do, and all of us that speak for human rights, that we have to make our efforts. We can't just think it's going to happen by the way. We can see injustices, we can see inequities, we can see racism, and if we're not standing up to get our voice heard, then it's just going to keep going. And we had our Islamophobia memorial on Friday, and you were a guest. Thank you for joining. And please let us know from your perspective, as you kind of saw some of the speakers, the young woman that spoke about her experiences with hijab and what have you. So I think a lot of folks that may not necessarily see the impact of how discrimination and how we look physically can impact how others treat us. And I thought what she said was very powerful. And maybe if you could just give us your perspective based on the discussion, what your perceptions and maybe some insights that you got that you may have not had prior to going into this.
Yeah, and thank you for putting together such a potent and powerful event. And I remember that night, that day, and actually at our school, what we had done, and I thank the principal at the time for allowing me to do this. We put together a lesson plan, like literally that night, and I had students very quickly draw up some ribbons as well. And then all of our classes took time to speak about the Quebec mosque that was attacked, why it was attacked, the deeper background of the Islamophobia that we were seeing daily, because I teach in a majorly Black, Indigenous, person of color school. And so many of our students that are hijabbed or not, that belong to the Muslim faith, we're going through a very difficult time, as well as obviously all those of us that really are connected to the notion of things other than Christianity. And not that Christians obviously didn't care, but just being mindful that in our environment, most of us had experienced that kind of microaggression to the point of terrorist attack before, that this was not new to us, unfortunately. So that was kind of how we took on that, because we had this power to do so as an institution, to really stop what we were doing and to truly focus on what was a major wound for Canada on that night. The event that was held on Friday was supremely powerful because, especially when the Mufti spoke in terms of the keynote, and everybody else, not to leave anybody behind, the dedication to understand the level of trauma that violence caused. And as we saw through some of the speakers, the continued realities, again, from the very small microaggression where someone might say, where are you from, all the way up to physical violence of having your hijab torn off, and especially under COVID, we've seen recent realities of folks of Asian heritage, or they are thought to be Asian, facing quite brutal attacks on sky trains and just on streets. What was powerful to me, and something that really I kept thinking about, was that movement forward. So there were so many speakers that out of that event have done more, have taken more action. The recent commemoration and the designation of January 29th nationally, as a day of commemoration. What does that actually mean? And as the Mufti spoke about the reality of, how we treat each other, how we look at, how we deal with things as the oppressed, but also towards the oppressor, and how we bring about that change that is needed, that dialogue, that need to listen. And to me, I tend to be more systemic in how I view things. Again, being mindful of the voices of our Indigenous communities, of Indigenous nations, of Black Canadians, of people of color that routinely point out the systemic realities here, and that we cannot just change one person. That is naive to think, if we only change one time or one incident. It needs to be systemic. So to me, I walked away out of Friday with a renewed sense of dedication to looking at how do we bridge that gap? How do we build those dialogues with folks that they get power from the system. And it's funny how always we minoritize. We tend to think of, there's a term race card in terms of, don't use the race card. And in all the work I've done and the research and the solidarity work, one thing I've realized is that there's one card we very rarely talk about, and that is the white card. And what I mean by that is that in a system that is Eurocentric, in a system that many of us who are speaking to different realities will face obstacles, that it's not always, we are not always believed, we are not always protected, that we don't take enough time to realize that, fighting for one cause or fighting against one person is not enough, because there's this much larger reality there that, well, we elevate certain things. And we need to point that out, and to do so in a way that isn't meant to attack. I never mean to attack anyone, but to me, as someone who is white passing, as someone who, if I don't say I'm Jewish, maybe people might not realize, although it's interesting to note that many people do realize, but anyways, but the reality that I know I have power. I know that I have unearned privilege. So when I speak to people that might see that as an attack against their roots, against their own lived experience, all I can say is that, but oppression comes forward in many ways. We all have prejudice, all of us, that there's always a way that we are conditioned that allows us to think about things, no matter the color of our skin, our lived experience. We know this to be true. But at the same time, I want people to be superheroes. I want people to use that sense of dialogue, that sense of love, and that sense of humanity that the Mufti spoke about, to actually think about ways that, well, then how can I use my position? Maybe it's making space. Maybe it's not always being the one that speaks out in terms of, like, being invited in. Can I bring someone else along with me? Even through social media, are there campaigns or stories or people that deserve highlighting that rarely get that highlighting? So speaking to things like Islamophobia and the fact that we do face this violence against our Muslim community, we need to think bigger. We protect everyone. We certainly empower victims that feel powerless or do not get justice through our justice system. But at the same time, like, it's like a two-forked approach, we do that, but we also go towards that systemic change, to not fear rising up and saying, what are we doing as a nation in our schools to actually address those issues, not just in a negative way, don't be Islamophobic, but also the positive way. How do we celebrate Muslim experiences? How do we celebrate faiths of all kinds so that we have less of that misunderstanding, which is something else that was brought up on Friday as well.
Absolutely, and you said earlier, some of these comments like, "Where are you from?" And so my family, Haroon, we're both of us are cousins. We're originally from so historically India, but Pakistan since partition.
Yeah.
But our grandfather and great grandfather came in 1904 from India, and at that time, and they came by boat. They docked in Aberdeen, Washington, and settled in Canada, and then back and forth from the homeland to the West Coast. And what's interesting, wherever I go, and people say, "Hey, where are you from?" I was like, "I'm from Canada." And they're like, "No, really, where are you from?" I was like, "I'm from Canada." So it's like an automatic assumption, because again, with the beard, the color, complexion, et cetera, people have a perception of how a Canadian should look. So that's interesting. And then you brought up in the school context. So just for me, I'm dating myself. I'm in my mid 40s, and so I was grade 10 when the first Gulf War happened, and at that moment. I don't think many people knew what Islam or Muslims were, but Saddam, again, was the enemy. And I remember it was a discussion in grade 10 social studies. And the topic was, is this a just war? And so everybody seemed to be pro-war. And I just said the obvious. I said, Saddam may be a bad guy, but men, women, and children that have nothing to do with him are going to get killed because of this bombardment that's going to happen. And I felt I was the lone voice, and I felt, wow, I really felt, this injustice is going to happen on people. They may not even get Saddam, but the regular people are going to suffer. That's even as a kid, it just seemed common sense to me, and I didn't even know much about my faith or religion at that time either. And so fast forward to uh, the late 90s, Al Qaeda, and then September 11th.
Mhm.
And then even my own spiritual journey, I realized, reading the scripture and, getting to understand Christianity, Judaism, Islam, many parallels, many similar teachings. And then when something like September 11th happens, then all of a sudden, now people are like, again, with visible Muslims that whether they wear the hijab or, with darker skins, even Sikh people would be
Yeah.
mistaken for Muslim and get attacked. And so then it became very real, very apparent. And it was like the drumbeats of media. As soon as a Muslim was mentioned, there's an explosion. It was like a neuro-linguistic programming, image, emotion, and words kind of tied together in a way to formulate a social engineering to make a whole group to be perceived in a very negative way. Where again, 1.6, 1.8 billion people in the world today, if there's like, Ku Klux Klan doesn't speak for all Christians, and extremists don't speak for the majority, but that's just the way the perception was.
Yep.
And so as a result, now regular people, again, I would say on a human level, no matter what religion or race or color, everyone's just worried about, we want to take care of our families, we want our career, we want work that we enjoy, we want to be prosperous. That's the majority of everybody. But extremists of all types, they want to break it all down. They want to they want to crash, they want to slash and burn. And even these extremists, and I think a lot of folks are not aware, like extreme groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda, the actual majority of the victims are Muslims. And so all of these things are things that what Hiba, who was speaking, was saying when she walks out the door. I don't have her experience because I'm 6'5", big guy. Nobody generally will approach me in that way. It has happened, but generally speaking, but for somebody who's 5'5", maybe hijab, and maybe somebody may not somebody may look at her and think, okay, this is somebody I can bully, I can say something to and not get harmed back. And so in that way, we're seeing in a school context, and I've heard this from Muslim students, that microaggressions and even comments like, somebody has a hijab, oh, you have a bomb in there, or you're a terrorist, or you're Osama bin Laden, or whatever it is. So these, teasing. So it's like there's bullying. Historically, there's always been bullying, but now to add this component that you are some sort of extremist, you are just by your the name or your appearance. And in the school context, what are your thoughts based on the school context of this type of bullying?
Yeah, let's tie all this together. I love everything you just said, and the reality, that depth you went to of that social conditioning. So we're looking at thousands of years of this. I remember, learning in university, unfortunately, reading the documents of the Cheneys and the Rumsfelds and the Wolfowitz of the world that would later become leaders in the United States, that would lead to the Afghani war and the Iraqi war, right? And seeing this all play out in front of me, completely horrified, because of the realities of that depth of that white Christian model of, this war of worlds, right? Which is, again, many, just like anti-Semitism is thousands of years old, so too is Islamophobia. So number one is that from an educator standpoint, needing to understand that different students will have different experiences. And for those of us that belong, whether that is to Islam or Judaism or Sikhism or Hinduism, and the list goes on, that we have more of an understood reality of that systemic oppression and of that daily reality of having to live through comments, sometimes quote unquote jokes, which are highly problematic. It's not about the intention, it's the perception that actually matters there. And so if we don't address it from that context, already we're causing harm. I think it is harmful to say as a teacher, we're in a multicultural Canada, and that's good. And you can celebrate this over here and you celebrate that over there, and that's all there is to it. But if we don't go further into, you know, what our students are facing on a daily basis, if we aren't willing to address the very real reality that, you know, you kind of stopped around, you know, the early 2000s, why did we have a Muslim ban for the past 4 years in the United States? You know, that's terrifying. That we are still at the point that we have yet to even go beyond that very vitriolic, hate-based idea that I judge someone based on their passport, color of their skin, what they wear, who they pray to. So we need to bring forward these conversations and not be afraid to do so. I think as an educator, as an education system, we cannot be neutral. Neutrality, and many people have said things like this, you know, if you are neutral, Desmond Tutu being, you know, one that comes to mind, if you are neutral in situations of oppression, then you are complicit in that oppression. So as educators, we cannot stand idly by. Do we see everything? No. And I think that's where we need to create environments for our students where they know it is okay to come forward to say, I'm not comfortable in this situation. Because especially with the internet and cyberbullying, we don't catch it all. In fact, you know, I'm 38. I'll date myself too. You know, the internet was around when I was in high school, but it wasn't at this peak that it's at, where, you know, it was in your home every single second. It wasn't in your mind every single second of every single day. But we have now, and many kids have said this, you know, the school might be, you know, a place where, you know, there might be that safe room, there might be that one teacher you can talk to, and so there's a little bit of an ability. I'm not saying schools are safe, or because I know everybody has a different experience. We try, but I don't think we always succeed. But you can't turn off that phone necessarily. Those messages will still come. Those memes, those the trends we see. I'm horrified at some of the trends about, you know, some of the jokes about Jewish people out there, because teaching kids that are not, I'm the only Jewish person in my entire school. So a lot of folks have never been to a synagogue, might not know a lot of other Jewish people. And so they just go by what society tells them. And sadly, it can be a very rude, incomplete, quite frankly, at times, anti-Semitic view. And I know that my Muslim brethren, you know, exactly the same thing, and to that even higher peak. Because yes, in terms of Judaism, you know, we still can, you know, we connect back to like the Old Testament and things of that nature. And there, those of us with more privilege and more power. So I want to make that clear. But at the same time, you know, that same kind of violence. So we need to label it as violence. We need stronger anti-racism policies. We need teachers who are anti-racist in their pedagogy and their approach to teaching. I don't use most of the textbooks provided to me because I feel they are incomplete. They are still written from a white Eurocentric perspective, and they don't actually recognize the value of humanity. They don't recognize the contributions that many different communities have made to Turtle Island and to the state we call Canada. And so it does take an activist approach, no doubt. And we know there are folks that are against that, even in the Lower Mainland. But all I can say is that if I, as a teacher, need to tell a parent that their child is safe at school, that's all, safe. I'm not putting gender to that. I'm not putting religion to that. I'm not putting skin color to that. I am using the word safe in terms of violence, right? So I don't know if you want to put a policing context on it, whatever. But the idea of safety is paramount to me as a teacher. I need to make sure my students are safe in this building, and I can guarantee that every single parent wants their child to be safe at school, that any abrogation of that safety is very much problematic, and teachers and districts and Ministry of Education need to be held accountable when that safety is not there. So that's where I'm coming from. If I want to create a safe environment, then I need to be activist in the way that I teach, what I teach about, and what I allow to exist in my space. So if students are joking about a hijab or anything for that matter, you know, I need to speak to that. I need to make sure that it is spoken to. We are not perfect at all. You know, and I think we all have those blind spots and not realizing. but that's why we need to have more of that dialogue, right? And that seems only obvious. But we shouldn't fear difference. We shouldn't fear an idea that maybe someone doesn't quite understand. Well, let's call them in. Let's have those discussions. If parents and staff and our education system continues to leave out people, you're just creating violence. You're creating in a very systemic way.
Agreed, agreed. And especially with experiences like um, as Muslims or visible Muslims, that experience, or as a Jewish person with that belief, that experience, only you understand it really because of these are our identities. And when we see negativity directed towards us, it affects our identity. And I will recommend this series on YouTube. It's called Uncomfortable Conversations with the Black Man.
Yep.
And fantastic. And he comes across it. People don't want to know what you know. They want to know that you care, that you care. And the way that he presented himself to folks from the Caucasian white community, again, there are blind spots. They don't necessarily understand common sense things that he was explaining. Was very profound. Just the simplicity of how he was explaining the experience of being a Black person in North America. And in a similar way, you may or may not be aware of what we did with the Al Jamia Mosque in Vancouver with Islam Unravelled and Temple Shalom and Congregation Beth Israel, Temple Beth Tikva. We did what we call an interfaith exchange because there were some members of the Jewish community that had never met Muslims and had never been to a mosque. And there are obviously many Muslims that have never met Jewish folks, or at least never had never been to a synagogue. And so by having that exchange where we came to the sanctuary, we sat for services as neighbors and as friends, and then breaking bread afterwards and having a general Q&A, and then having folks come to the mosque, joining the services, and that just simple act of just, hey, let's just see how everybody does their thing. And so there was some misconceptions from the Muslim community going in, and there's some misconceptions of the Jewish community coming into the mosque. But when we're together, we're just doing the human things of just talking, breaking bread, visiting one another. I believe that brought down kind of a lot of walls of misunderstanding and apprehension, and in a similar way with all communities to kind of bring people together. And again, back to that protest that you helped organize, bringing, and it was everybody from every background, religion, color, came together in solidarity, together in person. I think that is powerful, is getting people together in person.
Yeah. Oh, very much so. And I think, I love the power of words, the idea of unraveling, right? What does that actually mean? And this notion that, so I always welcome people, read the Black Lives Matter manifestos, read the Quran, look at different realities, reach out to that. The BC Community Alliance currently have a human rights case against the Vancouver School Board. Read what they're suggesting in terms of how we can strengthen anti-racism policies at the district level from a Black perspective. I think this is also important. And then after you sit, after you read, after you meet, after you attend, how do things change? How are you unraveling within yourself these notions of what you believe and why? And when I say blind spot, I don't mean to minimize the prejudice that creates that blind spot, right? It's just a visual to say, why, how that develops. And I'm also mindful that we understand our faith from, from a certain perspective. I think what those that have more power. So again, I do this game with my students called the name game. We talk about derogatory terms that are used that we use, that others use, that our institutions use. And very simply, something becomes very clear, that we elevate cis white males above all else in our language. And this is from, I've done this hundreds of times to thousands of people, mostly people of color, and yet we still have this reality. So what does that mean? We have given power, and this is very important, power and resources to a very specific group. And so they feel that when people say, let me tell you about Islam, let me tell you why hijabs and halal meat and, whatever you want to bring up, right? Or that as a Black person, I feel oppressed in our regular school system. They feel that somehow their power is going to be wrenched away from them. We have elevated the color of skin to such a level that to even use the word white is considered angry, is considered a violent act, when in fact, all it's doing is doing the exact same thing as looking at someone's identity and speaking about it. That's all. But we have long believed in this hierarchical, caste-like system where, we created this social construct of race, and whiteness was put at the top of that, and Christianity and Eurocentric ideas. So to unravel that is going to take a lot. And I'm thankful for the work that Islam Unraveled and so many other groups are doing, because the burden is on those groups to do that work, which is not easy when you consider, lived experience as well, and what you have to face. I'm looking forward to when people that have that power and privilege also step up their game and start to unravel their own prejudices, their own biases, and the very real reality that the unequal power that we have in this world, to somehow bring that to an equitable sense, does not mean they lose power. It only means that more people have access to literally, life, safety, security, right? Which again is very much part of the founding documents in terms of Canada. But it was written from a very different perspective. So I encourage people to go to these events, to create your own. It's not hard to talk to a neighbor. It's not hard to literally go online and check, or a YouTube channel that has a very interesting way of explaining something. We should not fear going above and beyond. We should not fear looking at something different. It doesn't minimize what we believe. It only adds beautiful complexity to it.
Absolutely. And to show that we as human beings, first and foremost, we're all human beings. And I think what's happening because of the way online aspects of our lives are taking so much of our attention, and the algorithms are really feeding into our existing belief systems, our existing interests. So we're not really seeing multifaceted, multicultural and diverse opinions. The social media algorithms are based to keep us engaged. So what we're already interested in, so whether it's from the Muslim component or let's say the white nationalists, their kind of media is just going to reinforce their perceptions. And these extremists like Alexander Bissonnette in Quebec that did the shooting, there were three commonalities. One was he was bullied considerably, and that's not justifying anything. He was bullied considerably, but that was one aspect of his psyche. So, and that obviously precipitated a mental health issue. And then on top of that, his viewing habits online were gearing towards Trump and white nationalism, and it was kind of building up this psychology, and it was feeding it until it erupted in an act of violence and murder. And because of all these things, which the online world is now reflecting in people's biases and hardening their beliefs, and racism is not going down, it's increasing, because the way these social media algorithms are reinforcing siloed biases and what have you. And I will say things that touched me were when we were in after the Quebec shootings and after the New Zealand shootings, is people came to our mosque with cards, with flowers, with tears in their eyes. And I thought to myself, wow, like in our time of worry, like sometimes when you're in your own community, you think, well, it just affects us. Why would anybody else care to kind of come and give us condolences? But they came by the thousands, and I realized the humanity. I think recognizing humanity, we're all human beings. We all have hearts. We all care for one another. And when we get together in person, and we get to see one another, we come to each other's places, we respect each other. I think that brings such community and power of community that I think the online world is dividing us so much and we're not interacting personally, and it's creating such a disconnected that we're just okay, well, that race of people, that religion of people, they're all like this because that's what my online world is telling me. and and so like you said, it may be pulling weeds kind of doing these programs and how much change, but we have to do them, we have to keep doing them because it's not like these things are going away, they're increasing. And so for the work that you're doing and we're doing to really just keep working towards positive change.
Absolutely. And there's something very, I always say when you look at the problem, flip it for the solution. And so to me, when I think about, a lot of these kind of lone wolf attacks when it comes to domestic terrorism and white supremacy, and we know they're not like lone wolf in the sense of like one person acts, but obviously there's a much larger reality to it. A couple things come to mind. Number one is that a lot of these movements believe in internalization. So, and especially that comes out of a patriarchal idea that somehow you shouldn't talk about your pain. You shouldn't express emotionality, that is weak, that is feminine, right? In a negative way. And so number one to me is that then teach people how to speak to one another, how to talk about what they're going through in their personal lives. Of course, we know that there's any number of socioeconomic hardships that people across the whole spectrum of humanity face, and that we need to actually address those issues. Or what about the reality that we live in these gender boxes that say if a man doesn't behave a very specific way, he is unmanly. So we internalize. And I noticed that in these white supremacy groups, they don't believe in reaching out. They don't believe in having discussions. So let's do the opposite, right? Secondly, that in doing that outreach, we can operationalize our social media. So social media is not going to go anywhere. It's only getting stronger and stronger. But what I tell my students is, who do you follow that's different from you? Can you find people that have maybe a different opinion? And I'm not saying that now you accept everything they say, but you listen and you think about what they're focusing on. Why is it that certain people in TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, speak to certain positions over and over again? Maybe this is something you don't know about. And this all comes from this concept of intersectionality that an African-American woman by the name of Kimberly Crenshaw came up with in the late 80s, early 90s. And that idea that we all have these multiple lived experiences that we need to think about. So we need to externalize a little bit more so that we can actually step out of these violent and painful moments. And by reaching out and by breaking through what is a very commodified model, internet, it's about money, right? Social media is about money. But if you really break out of that mold of that algorithm, it's amazing what you can learn and who you can meet and find commonality with people. Because you're right, it's about humanity. And whatever pain that man felt, undoubtedly many people felt that, but it had nothing to do with Islam. It had nothing to do with someone different than him. And I do think those counter narratives are very key. That whenever someone says it's the other that's the problem, you don't have a job because of this, you're unhappy because of this person, that we should always say no to that, always, and think, no, let's dive deeper. Let's really talk about what's actually going on here. So to me, I always see it as very much a multiple approach. And our indigenous nations know this best, and their ways of knowing look to nature. And I always think about bee colonies. Our bee colonies are dying and are very much, putting in peril our food security around the world because they lack access to nutritious, diverse food. Why? Because we've turned to cash crops. We believe in just making the most money possible. And so over time, our agricultural industries have focused on a very few variants of crops. So, but what bees need to literally, because they're the ones who very much, propagate food systems, is that they need the most diverse diet possible. So if in nature, the most healthy ecosystem is a diverse one, from our oceans to our forests to the air to everywhere, then why isn't diversity the key for humanity? Why isn't diversity the key to the safest, healthiest, most productive form of our human lives? And so I always say, like, when people say the opposite, that is truly the most unnatural way. And for those of us that do believe in the omnipotence of God, that well, then God, and you know, and you can be atheist, whatever, no judgment. But the reality is that for those of us that do believe, that omnipotence means that it supports that diversity in every way, shape, and form. And I do think that's a way that faith is very powerful, because it can provide us with those ideas, and yes, the belief in nature, that's faith. You know, no matter what you might call the god or gods that you follow.
Absolutely. And I know and this leads exactly into what you and I were going to discuss offline, is the United Nations Day on March 21st for the elimination of racial discrimination. And so this fabric of humanity, black, brown, white, yellow, all the colors that represent humanity, and again, racial discrimination just by the color of the skin, like you were talking about white passing, or whatever the case may be, and people mistaking certain races for other people. But the reality is, the first thing people see is skin tone, color, and there's whole industries about skin whitening
Yep.
kind of
Yep.
creams and what have you.
Yep.
And so for this event, I know we're in our planning stages, but the vision being, how all races and our First Nations people, our African brothers and sisters, our Asian community, how all of us can come together to celebrate each other, because it's by race and by color is really how we first perceive each other. That's the first thing before religion. Anything else is that first perception of, oh, who is this person based on their appearance. And so I think leading up to this planned event, I think it'll be an interesting kind of thing offline, where we can strategize how we can effectively represent everybody in the best way forward, because we are this fabric of humanity, and really, to live in such a country as Canada, to do this work that we're doing in other countries, we couldn't do it. And
Yeah.
so grateful to be in this country
Absolutely. Yeah. I,
that
I,
we can.
I very much look forward to that. It's going to be incredible. And yet here I am, right? And I was born in Montreal. I am Canadian by origin, I think that's a privilege that we need to use, and that we can make things better. That we absolutely have issues here at home that we can focus on, we can work on, right? That this is not, but the fact that I know just how much ability I have to do that compared to where it would be elsewhere. Secondly, to me, my big belief, something that I've developed over time, and many others do this work as well. Part of my pedagogy is mentorship through identity. When you look at someone, and because we live in these structures of race and skin color, that your first thought should be a positive one, that you want to know more, that you don't denigrate based on skin color. Because at the end of the day, to me, one of the most frightening things about the concept of whiteness is that it erases the realities of the Scottish, of the different types of Irish folks, that some have gone massive oppression under, you know, the British Empire, just like others have. You know, when you look at the multiplicity of experiences in Europe, you know, again, this is very much just a biological DNA thing. You know, I'm white passing, but I have family members that are as dark as someone that comes out of India or Pakistan, or, you know, many nations of Africa. Like, this is something that should not define us in a negative way. So to me, it's always about that mentorship through identity. I want people that are of white skin tone to find their roots, to understand the beauty of their cultures, and to understand that no culture should dominate any other culture. That's the bottom line. How do we remove oppression from identity? And if we can do that, then there is no playing any race card. There is no sense of somehow that someone, again, it's really, I don't even want to say the language, but when certain conservative groups bring up this notion that identity is problematic, but scream about, you know, the war on Christmas, I don't understand it, because they're missing the entire point. And that is that whether you celebrate Christmas or Eid or Hanukkah or whatever faith, you know, Diwali, at the end of the day, what you're doing is celebrating your own roots. Those roots, at the very basic human form, have nothing to do with power, privilege, and resource. It's meant to celebrate, you know, the uniqueness that is yourself and your community. And so I hope that March 21st, we can really delve into that. And really within Canada, within all around our world, because it is an international day, how do we reframe things so yes, we can fly that Canadian flag, but we don't focus on this nationalism or patriotism that forms this opinion that somehow you have to be white, non-hijab wearing, you have to have all these certain precepts to be Canadian, when that is in fact the opposite of what the hope of Canada, can be, right? And of course, to note, I have to mention that within the Indigenous context, that decolonization will make us better. That going away from notions of this, colonial entity is a good thing, because so many of us actually within Islam, within Judaism, within many forms of Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, do come from colonized nations. And unfortunately, many of us have escaped those colonial notions. And I think that's something we can also focus on, because it is something that we don't talk enough about.
Absolutely. And Annie, thank you again for taking your time out on a Sunday in your classroom
Yeah.
for this purpose. I know, as you said, this work is ongoing, it's continuous, and thank you again for joining us and sharing us your expertise, your experience, your care, your concern, and we really appreciate it.
And thank you to Islam Unravelled for all the work you do. And I think all of us are blessed. I work in what I love. And I wish that for everybody, right? That you work and you spend your time doing things on things you love and that you're not forced to do. So thank you so much for all your work. And I can't wait to collaborate further.
Thank you, Annie.
All right.
Appreciate it.